Hey, let's talk about illustration. Illustration, art, what's what? Let's talk about it. So, this is a brief, no way comprehensive, short and sweet view on what illustration is. And we're going to do it Patrick Scullin style. So, let's look at what we're talking about. Art versus illustration. Now, this is a little bit of a, not a controversy, but a discussion about what constitutes art, what constitutes illustration. Are they different? Are they better? What's the difference? Let's talk about it. If you look at something like this, Starry, Starry Night, you ask yourself, is this a work of art? Yes, of course. Is it a work of illustration? Kind of. Who made it? Vincent van Gogh, famous expressionist, impressionist. I don't know which one actually, but definitely an abstract painter who worked hard to craft a painting that expressed something, that using his brushstrokes, he tried to develop his view on the world. Very interesting, beautiful. Unfortunately, he wasn't very successful in his life and he lost an ear in the process. Here's another one, Monet. Beautiful paintings of water lilies and all other kinds of foliage that he created in his lifetime. Hundreds of other types of paintings that he did. Also, an impressionist painting where they wanted to see the world around them, or at least represent, show the world the way they saw it through their brushstrokes. And it's really when you started to see these beautiful brushstrokes become visible and become a part of the craft of making the painting. There he is, Claude Monet. Here's another one. Might recognize it. An abstract, somewhat controversial artist. Did a variety of different things, explored a lot of different types of art through his career. Pablo Picasso, right? So definitely deconstructing a painting and an image and figuring out how to present it in a new and different way. So art equals expression. The artist's expression. They want to say something, they want to emote something, they want you to feel something when you look at their work. That's what art is, right? So I would say that illustration is art plus expression plus one key element, story. Illustration is art that tells a story. Now, that's not saying that's the only way to do illustration, but generally, most of the time, my favorite type of illustration tells some sort of story. One of my favorite illustrators slash artists, Alphonse Mucha. Now, he would craft these beautiful works of art, detailed images with all kinds of interesting pattern and shape inside and around his subject, always kind of like the ideal female character in his artwork. But these beautiful paintings and illustrations were made for advertisements. So he wasn't just painting a picture to hang on some castle wall somewhere. He was actually painting, creating, crafting a picture that would be printed on a temporary poster that would be slapped on a wall to advertise something. But at the same time, he had the integrity or the artistic expression to make something beautiful in the process. And his artwork is, tightly connected to the printing process also, which I think is really cool. That's him, Alphonse Mucha. He has a vast career of kind of unknown works. He's most well known for his posters, but he also did murals and very interesting works throughout his life. A lot of cool stuff that unfortunately were kind of suppressed behind the Iron Curtain over the years. But of course, artists have been admiring his work ever since they discovered him. Here's another painter slash illustrator in a way. This one is one of the traditional artists that worked in the salon creating portraits of, rich and wealthy people, but his portraits always had a little bit of a twist. You could feel a little bit of the personality in his work beyond just the likeness. And that's something really interesting about John Singer Sargent. He had an expression, a double expression in his work, not just the beautiful painting, but he was really good at capturing personality. What I find really interesting as I'm looking at these dates is these different artists were contemporaries. You've got Van Gogh, Picasso, Sargent, Mucha. They all lived in the same time period. So isn't it interesting that sometimes art history will catalog certain people as this and that when they're just artists working in their different field or illustrators? Here's another one of my favorite illustrators from the early 20th century, J.C. Leyendecker. His work is so interesting. Bold, really distinct brush lines. You can see his pencil lines. You can see the marks where he drew the figures. They're realistic, but they're also a little bit not cartoonish, but you can see they're stylized people. But what I love about it is these paintings were made to sell shirts, dress shirts, and lifestyle. And, these guys at the golf game in the 20s, these really dapper dudes ready to go out and play some golf, right? Cool. I love that they would actually go to this much effort to paint for that kind of advertisement. Again, similar to Mucha in that his work was mass produced, seen everywhere, and almost kind of overlooked for the beauty of its painting style. A perfect successor to J.C. Leyendecker is this artist, probably the most well-known illustrator of the 20th century. That would be Norman Rockwell. This is an example of the paintings he made for the different freedoms from the Bill of Rights. He had a way of not only capturing a likeness, but more than that, telling a really interesting story with the acting and the models and the design of his pictures. And so you really don't need any words or written information to understand what his painting is about because he was so good at staging, at putting together a picture that told a story. Every element in the picture is working to tell the story. And that's, a real important craft of the illustrator, being able to make all of the pieces of their work come together to tell that cohesive story. Like I said, Norman Rockwell. Now, this one is when I think you kind of get a little bit of abstract art and illustration together, start having some fun. This one is an artist, Mary Blair, who worked for Disney. And a lot of her work was used during the development process for different films. And so you can see this one is for Alice in Wonderland. And if you love or hate Small World, you can thank Mary Blair. Her artwork and her design is all over that ride. So Disney really encouraged her and used her a lot in the 50s and the 60s to develop the artwork for different films and amusement park rides. So she had a great influence, and a lot of her style you'll see shows up in animation and pop art of the day. Of course, one of my personal favorites, great pulp artist, comic book artist, Jack Kirby. Now, Jack Kirby had a long career in comics, starting out in the 30s and the 40s, and then lasting all the way to the 90s. But he is responsible for the majority of the design and a lot of the comics of the original Marvel universe. And so he co-created Captain America, he co-created the Avengers, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, X-Men, all of those long-running titles that have made Marvel really successful came from his pencil and his pen. I love his style. It's really dramatic, really cool, action-packed, and it's overlooked in the art world as anything of importance when you look in the history books. But he is probably one of the most prolific artists in the 20th century, creating stuff and entertainment for the world around him. Jack Kirby. Personal favorite also, Drew Struzan. Now, this poster artist is the most successful, most well-known poster artist of the 20th century, the late 20th century for sure, the 70s and the 80s, the 90s. It was rare to find an action movie that didn't have a Drew Struzan poster. And his work was so beautiful and interesting. He had the ability to capture a likeness, but also do it in an artistic way, and then tell that broader story through the way he illustrated the characters and the different events from the film. So Drew is one of the best ones to look at as an artist for inspiration. I understand he's retired and may be a little unwell, so I wish him the best. Next artist for me In the 80s, another seminal artist is Patrick Nagel. You can see Patrick Nagel is a big inspiration on me in terms of crafting what I think of as like 80s pop art. He was the one responsible for all these glamour pictures, made these beautiful designs, these pretty ladies in these glamour poses, but he did it in a way that was, a strong contrast to what had been done before. And it really was the style of the 80s. Now, unfortunately, he died young, so we never got to see what his style developed into. But this is definitely him in a time capsule. Great work, cool stuff, and I just eat it up. Patrick Nagel, 45 to 84. And then another artist, personal favorite for me from comics, is Adam Hughes. And you can kind of see here the connection between what Adam Hughes does and Alphonse Mucha, which we looked at the beginning. Adam credits Alphonse Mucha as one of his inspirations, 100 years later. But Adam the ability to also capture a likeness, but then also craft a beautiful figure and put that figure in a beautiful frame and an interesting environment. You can see that he did for the DC heroes. But he has such an artistry and kind of an intentionality of his work that it just looks amazing and it just rises above any of his competitors. And so I love admiring Adam Hughes' work. Good stuff. And if you can run into him at a convention, he's got great stuff you can see. Just reams of posters and prints and interesting stuff that he's done. Patrick Scullin, that's me, still around. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I use these artistic, inspirations in my work. So here's a J.C. Leyendecker painting. I loved how these, dress shirt advertisements, you don't even see the advertising message that was done later, but these paintings by themselves were amazing. And he used every bit of his painting to make room for and tell the story. And I love how these things would just, disappear into the blackness of the background, where, you just see his hand or the edge of his shirt kind of come forward, and then everything else just disappears into the background, and there's room for the advertising message and whatnot around his illustration. So he tells a beautiful story of glamour and elegance while showing that lifestyle, which to me makes these illustrations really sing. And at one time, I wanted to do my own version. So this one was a little more cartoon-like, but I loved the idea of the character disappearing into the black background. Patrick Nagel, like I said, big inspiration on me. So for years, I've been doing my own Patrick Nagel inspired portraits. Say that three times fast of Princess Leia. And so I love the challenge of capturing her likeness, but then figuring out the geometry and the silhouette and the color to work for my posters and the version that I make of those portraits. Here's a sergeant. As a painter, I love learning his ability and his craft in painting a likeness. I aspire to being able to paint like that, but I know I never will. But in the meantime, it gives me a target to aim for. And that's what these are. These are my little character portraits done in a painterly style in acrylic and my version of a portrait painting. I love looking at these and seeing how the master works, using that as a way to maybe improve and overdevelop. I don't want to say overdevelop, but develop my own style. So, what do you do? I always like looking at illustration as a way of inspiring me, and then I try to let it guide me into my own direction for my own style, my own subjects. But at its core, illustration to me is always telling a good story. And to me, that's what makes it both attractive, interesting, and entertaining. I certainly love to admire fine art, but if it doesn't have a story at its core, it doesn't quite make sense to me. So for me, art is illustration and illustration is art. All right, see you around.